Hi, you're listening to FREJDA Talks, a sporadically published podcast series focusing on current events and job markets in the field of the social sciences. Hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to FREJDA Talks. My name is Alicia, and today we do an episode on gender and the environment. I'm here today with Pattanun. Do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Thank you, Alicia. My name is Pattanun Arunpreechawat. I'm from Bangkok, Thailand. I study literature in university and I'm interested in gender and environmental issues.
Yeah, so you're here today to talk about some cases that are active right now in Thailand. So do you just want to start with your first one?
Yeah, so today I got two stories to share with you guys today. So first we will go briefly about it and then we will talk a little bit more later in the episode. So the first case is it's about the Chinese mining company who went to the northeastern part of Thailand in the province of Sakon Nakhon. So when the people, when the community in that area found out that there's going to be drilling and extraction from the mining company, the women in that area form an anti-mining group, to fight for environmental justice since they learn about, the dangers of mining, but they also face a lot of intimidations and a lot of lawsuits from the company. And the second one is about indigenous group in Thailand, Bangloi. So Bangloi is a term refers to a Karen or indigenous to the Thailand-Burma border who have been living in Gangajan forest for centuries, long before the forest became a national park in 1981. So there's an issue going on because Bangloi have been evicted by the Thai government before, and the recent issue was that this national park was nominated to become one of the UNESCO list, and a lot of activists were trying to, drag the procedure of the national park becoming one of the UNESCO list because the Thai government could use this as a justification to expel them out of their land.
No, I think what kind of catches me here is that this is such a kind of universal issue because we have your cases in Thailand. I know I worked with cases in South Africa that is very similar. I also know that there's this kind of resistance against extraction policies and land developments, even here in Sweden, in the north up in the north in Sápmi. But we kind of have discussed a bit about ecofeminism as a way of analyzing these cases. So if you would explain ecofeminism a bit to us, how would you describe it?
Okay, well, I mean, I have a little bit of disclaimer. I'm not an expert in ecofeminism, but from what I have learned and understood, and also an ecofeminist myself, ecofeminism or ecological feminism is the term that actually means the connection between women and nature, how women and nature share similar features and how both of them are, exploited or oppressed by either men patriarchy or, capitalism. So this is a word coined by French feminist. I'm not sure if I pronounced her name correctly, but it was coined by François de Urban in 1974. And the principle of ecofeminism, it can be traced to this Western thinking called hierarchical dualism. So the hierarchical dualism talks about, the subsets of oppositions, the binary oppositions such as self versus other, men versus women, and culture versus nature. So it talks about, one opposition is not dominating valued or privileged over another. So, in this case, self is more valued or more privileged and more dominating over other. Men is more dominating over women, and obviously culture is more dominating to nature.
Yeah, how I kind of relate to this, not having really heard about the subject before, is through kind of indigenous research. So I just started writing my master thesis on Sápmi and Sami in Sweden. And they also talk about this Western dualism, which kind of separates, for example, human from nature in a way that isn't really recognizing the human's role in the ecosystem. So I think it's interesting how it kind of like interlaps different kinds of research, that this is a real issue that kind of has an effect on kind of the current climate crisis as well as these specific cases that we're talking about. But you mentioned that in your first case that women has had a big role in that movement. So how do you kind of connect the women's role there to ecofeminism?
Yeah. I mean, to give a little bit of background of, that northeastern part of Thailand. So the northeastern part, we call it Isan, right? So the Isan area is usually viewed as, rural. It's not as abundant as other parts of Thailand. So most of the men in that community, they usually migrate to the cities to find jobs, to earn an income. And the women are usually left in, that area. And it's really important how, these women form an anti-mining group and, fight against the mining company, because living in the rural areas, they cannot really like do, other jobs like financing or, marketing and stuff like that. Jobs that they do is, related to like agriculture and environment. So they have a very like intimate relationship with the nature, because concerned about their livelihoods, health, and environment. They need that to form a group and fight against the companies. I believe that like these women probably don't know the term feminism or ecofeminism at this point, but the way that they care about the environment, the way that they protect, the way that they become leaders eventually. There's even like an interview from one of the women in the movement said that they feel empowered. Like they said, like at home they didn't do anything, but once this movement started and they became leaders, they have more responsibilities. They feel more empowered to actually take charge and protect their community. So just how that land is about to be exploited and their livelihoods are about to be hijacked by those companies, they rose up and fight against these forces, capitalism, environmental destruction, and other kind of stuff. So I really view them as eco-feminists.
Yeah, okay, but then there's this, could you say that there's this kind of like maybe division in ecofeminism, that on one hand it's how it's used as an academic term, and then on another hand that this is something that is done, it's a type of action or activism, or a perspective on activism at least, that is also like useful when you do it, like this is kind of a position you can come from, it's not just some theoretical concept. So where do you think the kind of overlap between the two, like where academia and real life kind of overlap when we talk about ecofeminism?
Yeah, well, like personally, I feel like ecofeminism, like the term ecofeminism, is there to explain, the situation, the history, like what's going on in our societies and stuff like that. So it's just like a term to describe certain things, certain situations, certain people, right? These people, like these women in action who actually like doing something, fighting for a cause, they probably don't know the term ecofeminism. My mom probably doesn't know what feminism is, but she is definitely a feminist, for example. Like these people don't know these kind of terms, but they are actually, doing the things that align with, ecofeminism, ecofeminist concepts. But then I also want to like raise, like a criticism towards, the academia group, is that, like sometimes I'm not sure like how Sweden is like, but a lot of like academy here, it can be very like limited. The knowledge can be very limited, or academia things. It's just that they talk about theories, they talk about concepts, they talk about, who coined this term, who invented this theory, but it has never really been brought down to the grassroots movement. It has never really contributed to these people. Like, for example, this year or the past year since we had COVID, Thailand has been struggling with the power struggle, the class struggle, right? We have been having pro-democracy protest movement. There's also a lot of discussion between the non-violent and violent protests. But which strategy is the best one? It even applies to Black Lives Matter movement, right? There are people who agree with the nonviolent protests. There are people who said we need to be violent or we will not be heard, for example. And I'm just wondering if academia really contribute to people in action here.
That is a really, really good point. I do agree that is something that always needs to be discussed, because coming from kind of a newer discipline with peace and conflict, I think the best lesson and what I'm really trying to carry from that is what we basically got told day one when we started, that when we do our research, when we become professionals that go out in the field and work with, well, for example, Indigenous people, women, any marginalized group, just ask the locals. Just that simple question, ask the locals, because they will tell you what they need. And then from our experience, we can pull the relevant theoretical concepts and strategies of doing something. But academia does nothing if it also doesn't correspond to an actual need.
Exactly. I think there's an issue that we face nowadays. Maybe it applies to academia, maybe it applies to policymakers. Sometimes people just tend to put the words in, the people who are affected, put the words in their mouth and never really ask them what they need, what do they want, but it's just all in their concepts and this is what I study, this is what I know, and this is probably what they need, but never actually go to the affected area, affected people, and actually ask them what they really need.
Definitely. And if we go back a bit to ecofeminism, there was this critique when I just did a bit of reading up on it, there was this critique that it has received for being kind of essentializing women's way of being and thinking, making them natural, and kind of can hide hide intersectionality, where women's experience also intersects with class or ethnicity, sexuality, being able-bodied. What do you think of that critique against ecofeminism?
I kind of agree and disagree. I'll talk about how I disagree with it first. I think this movement, or any kind of feminist movements, feminism is a big term, right? And it evolves, from the beginning, the suffragette and suffragist movement, it's still, a white feminist movement, and then it evolves to Black women, and, even the Black woman, I think it was Black women who coined the term intersectional feminism, which you just mentioned before, right? How one identity composes a lot of things like race, gender, class, and these kind of things have an impact on their lives. They face certain kind of stigma, stereotypes, and discrimination based on their identity, and they have various identities, right? But ecofeminism, in a way, it's just another branch of feminism. Feminism can be, ecofeminism, intersectional feminism, Marxist feminism, or even liberal feminism. But in a way, I do feel that, it's just a way of, when we look at these principles, it's just a way of interpreting things. Maybe women might not, maybe one woman might not want to be put in the household atmosphere, but that's what the expectation of reality. Maybe it doesn't really apply to the West anymore because, because of the progressive thinking. But in various parts of the world, it still exists, and there are always certain expectations that women need to have this like caring characteristic, need to be giving all the time, need to reproduce, like reproductivity, right? Just how, nature are supposed to give and people can take, just like how, women have to bear children so that these children can sustain capitalism, for example. But at the same time, the term ecofeminism, it can essentialize in a way that, if you talk about how maybe the people who coined the term are white people, are white women, or the people who acknowledge or like call themselves as ecofeminists as white women, sometimes we call this thing as strategic essentialism, in a way that we kind of like use certain attributes of diverse group of people to unite and actually like do something in action for a cause. But are there certain people oppressed on the way? Probably yes. I want to raise this theory by Spivak, can the subaltern speak? So the subaltern here, I mean, the term subaltern, it was refer to middle class before, so the bourgeoisie. But the subaltern in Spivak's term, it means the oppressed, the voiceless. It talks about how the oppressed sometimes, even though they speak, they are not heard, so they are still like voiceless anyway. So if white women talk about the issues of indigenous women, because indigenous women doesn't have a voice and white women have a louder voice, is that a violence? Is that an oppression? I would say yes, it's still an oppression. But then again, you still need to weigh whether you want this issue to be recognized in a wider public in exchange for oppressing the oppressed again. Because when you speak for the oppressed, in a way, you are also making them even more unheard by speaking for them, like by not letting them speak for themselves. But in the same time, do people really hear these underprivileged women? That's also like a thing that, it depends on your opinion.
I think like what is really important, like just add something to what you just said, is kind of context. Because personally, I don't know how it looks within Thailand, but I have not heard about the cases you have lifted. So like maybe it's good that you also bring it here to this audience and like talk about it. But I know, for example, as I said, like now trying to like approach as a white woman in Sweden, like doing research with our indigenous group with Sami, that I don't want to speak about their oppression, because there is a really strong movement. There is like strong leading activists that already talk about these extraction projects, for example. Like there's been a lot of talk about the resistance against the Gallup mines. So I think there's also this kind of context that maybe some issues you can raise as a researcher, still being mindful of not speaking for them, but maybe being a platform to make them heard.
Yeah.
And maybe other times like taking a step back and being like, this is already happening. I don't need to add my voice into the mix here.
That's exactly my thought. Like, if you know their conditions, you don't have to speak for them, but give a platform for them to speak. That's just, another way to lift other people up as well.
Yeah. I don't have that much to add here, but do you have anything else you want to say about ecofeminism or about these cases that we have discussed?
No, not really. I think we have covered pretty much everything.
Yeah. And I'm also sure that there's a lot more to discuss here in theory, but this is a short episode. We can't talk about everything. Yeah, but if you found this interesting and want to read up a bit more about this, the book we have been talking a bit about here about ecofeminism is called Contemporary Perspectives on Ecofeminism by Mary Phillips and Nick Rumans, released or published 2015. If you want to know more about Sami issues, you can look at the Sami Council's webpage. And if you want some other perspectives on ecofeminism and And the environment, there's the anime Princess Mononoke, or the book The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which is the first in a trilogy. So I hope maybe those will be helpful to start doing a bit more research if you found this interesting. And thank you so much, Pattanun, for coming and like giving your perspective and having this really interesting discussion with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Do you have anything you want to promote for our listeners where they can find you?
I think they can find me on Instagram, Yin Yin. So it's YINYEANNN. Yeah. And I'm also starting like this project on Instagram as well, where I would, post about social issues, let it be, environment, gender, or anything that we care. So, if anyone, wants to discuss about, ecofeminism again, or, wants to join me, please feel free to DM me for more details.
That sounds like a really good initiative. Awesome. I hope it goes well for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to all our listeners. I hope you found this interesting, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for tuning in. You can find FREJDA at frejda.org or at FREJDA.org on all social medias.